Welcome to the Concert Queen Connect. I'm very excited. I don't even know where to begin with our next guest, Josh Donaldson, who is the founder of When the Music Stops and I feel like you've lived so many different lives. So while this is your life now, 2011, like the number one handshake hand to shake in Vegas and tour manager, some of the biggest artists in the world, and just live this life that kind of led you to, the highs and the lows that come in the music industry. And this podcast is actually based on connection.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to talk to you today. So welcome.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
So happy to be. So I saw you at Blended. How was that experience for you?
Yeah, Blended was great. One of my dear friends for over 17 years, Kalika Moklin,
yes,
is the promoter, essentially. She runs all of the festivals in conjunction with the CEOs. And her and I have known each other since like 2004, and we worked together for like 10 years for the same company in Las Vegas. And then she owns a DJ agency called Blackout Artists. And then her and I work together. She does a lot of hip hop talent buying across the country that people don't know about. Mm-hmm. So I did some hip hop shows in San Francisco for like 4 years, and I would do them with her, like Trey Songz, Nelly, Ja Rule, all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And that was with her. And so her and I have this great rapport. So when I did this, she was like, "Hey, do you want to be our wellness director and run our, wellness division?" And where I'm doing my best to stay away from wellness, I'm all in on suicide prevention. But if by having a massage table and an IV area allows me the space to talk about suicide prevention, I'm all for it.
Right. And it kind of brings people in too. Like I didn't realize that you had all these different services there. When I walked in, I was like, oh, I wish I would have known about this. Like all the different things. There was just so much going on with that festival. But let's take it back to, you have this crazy life that you were living, and just that kind of brought you up to When the Music Stops started, essentially. So can you take people kind of through that journey of where you began? I know you were in Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm from Seattle, Washington, and I started tour managing for a really big rave DJ. He was like the superstar of the rave scene. His name was Donald in the late 90s, probably around like 97, 98. And him and I just started carrying his records and everything. And he's African-American and I was Caucasian and well, I still am. But I was, 17, 18 years old, and he was much older than me. And so we were kind of like this odd duo that were bound together through our passion and love of music and everything like that. And I would just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, and he would just listen and laugh. But I was a little bit of a bulldog. He was a gentle giant and people just loved him, but there was also a lot of people that would take advantage of him. And I love to take the heat. I'd love to jump in between, like take bullets for him. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So if somebody wasn't ready to pay, I don't want to say I would go collect, but I would go find the money. You know what I mean? If somebody, if he needed, whatever he needed to make sure that his performance was going to be the best it could be, I was the one to go get that done. You know what I mean? Whatever it was, ice, towels, water, that's normal now. It wasn't then. So I started as a tour manager, and by the time I was 21 years old, I'd been to almost 24 countries with him. And we had recorded albums across overseas and things like that. I'd helped him negotiate one of his record deals and things. And, I had a musical ear, but I also had a business mind at a very young age. And so my job was to be a protector for musicians and creatives. So I wanted to let them focus on the art, focus on the music, focus on the energy. And I wanted to handle all the bullshit. I don't know if we're allowed to swear.
Yeah, you can swear.
I wanted to handle all the bullshit, all the contracts, all the logistics, all the money, all the taxes, all the deals, whatever we're doing. You know what I mean? I'm on that part of it. You focus on your creative brain, because a lot of times I found that a DJ was just like an unbelievable musician, like like an old guitarist or something like that, from like Slash from Guns N' Roses, or, you know, Les Claypool, or, you know, somebody who's super eccentric, they're not good at something. Often if there is a part of the brain that you're really incredible at, there's something else that's lacking, I suppose. There's, you know, it's give and take.
Right.
You know, so if you're this brilliant, super musician, you might not be great at mathematics, or you might not be great at business, or you might not be great at cooking or cleaning or something. You know what I mean? And so there's this, you know, you have these unbelievable gifts that you're sharing with the world, but then there's other things that you need people to help with. And so I filled a lot of those roles. And we did that, and I left Seattle in the early 2000s, right around 9/11, and moved to Los Angeles. And I was running a club down there, and we were still working together. And then I got recruited to move to Las Vegas and be the director of promotions for a club called Ice. And this was like 2003, 2004. And I was going back and forth between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. And I just was right there as the dance music was exploding in Las Vegas, and had my finger on the pulse. And I ended up standing on the Strip for 14 years.
Wow. So what kept you going in that scene? And was it just the momentum of, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot going, not only, you know, to go from Los Angeles to Vegas, but just that lifestyle. Was that just kind of the norm for you, or did you know that, hey, this is moving at a really fast pace compared to
so now it's 2021, and this isn't something I'm a big fan of talking about, but I was recently diagnosed with hypomania. And so I was not diagnosed with that then. So I had that manic, it's hypomania is like a lower stage of mania, but I had really high highs, and I was able to run hot for a few years back then when I was younger, where now and when I'm older, you have a lot of energy for 3 days, then crash for like 3 days. Back then I could run hot for like 3 years.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so with that energy, I was constantly being stimulated, and my mind, I could process information at a really fast rate. So I was really good at logistics or marketing, branding, strategy, understanding all these different variables, taking all these different factors, and what do we need to do to get to, you know, to be successful. But my passion was music. As you've probably heard on one of my previous interviews, I grew up in Seattle, but during the grunge era. So Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Mudhoney, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, all of them were really popular when I was in middle school and high school. And then also I went to an extremely diverse high school, so I was surrounded by hip hop culture. So I was listening to alt rock, I was listening to hip hop equally. And then my mother was somebody that lived in San Francisco in 1967 during the Summer of Love. So I had this Jimi Hendrix, Jefferson Airplane, Grace Slick, you know, Janis Joplin influence in my life as well. So all of that music created this melting pot in my heart. And dance music was for my generation. That was for us. That was the counterculture sound of what it is, where now EDM and dance music is super popular. You know, in 95, 96, it was like what you weren't supposed to be listening to. You would go to the college radio station at 2 a.m. MTV had a TV show called AMP, and it would only start after midnight on Friday nights. Like, it was like at the dark, and, you know, you'd go to a rave and it would be in a warehouse that was broken into, and you had to call a payphone hotline to figure out where it was. So it felt exciting. And then taking it from that and then bringing it to Las Vegas, that was equally as exciting, because it was like they had all this money, but they didn't know anything about our culture. So I was somebody that was able to be one of the pieces in the wheel of bridging dance music from the rave scene into Las Vegas, which helped, I think, push it a little bit more mainstream, especially in the United States.
Right.
Obviously it was much bigger in Europe and Spain and all these other parts of the world. But when you'd go to Las Vegas to go on your tourist vacation and there would be a DJ playing and we were putting DJs on a pedestal, either you came from the rave scene and you knew that and you were excited, you were a little older now, instead of, taking, drugs, you were now drinking or buying bottle service, or you were somebody that had never heard dance music before and it was something new and exciting and euphoric. Wow. And so it brought all this flood of emotions. And so I felt compelled to do my best to be a part of that. And I felt like one of the protectors of dance music, whether I was or wasn't, I don't know. It could have been a hypomanic thing.
Well, it almost served you too. Like you
completely.
said, it totally served you. And thank you for sharing that. But I think that's what some people, they don't necessarily realize, like some of the greatest artists themselves, that they have some type of, mental, whatever it is, Asperger's, or a little bit on the spectrum, but they're some of the most brilliant minds that we have. So like you said, in that particular moment, it sounds like that really did serve you to push you to kind of keep going and operating at that state.
Definitely. No, it really did. And I think on some level I was probably addicted to the dopamine, traveling the world, eating great, meeting lots of beautiful women, meeting all kinds of new people, going to new places, all these different things. It just was a constant overload of sensation and senses. And when I was young, I could handle that. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized that that's not great for your nervous system.
Wow. So yeah, what, cause I know you talked about that, like endorphins versus dopamine, and that being, the chemicals in your brain and everything like that. So when, you're in Vegas, you're living this life, when did you start coming to kind of a crossroads? You're like, okay, things maybe are not as glamorous, or I know you said you felt unhappy, but what part, how did you know that was?
Well, there was a couple different things that happened. In 2007, something that I don't talk about, in interviews, but I will. But I talk about privately when I volunteer and I speak at treatment centers and detoxes and things like that. Was in 2007, I tried to drink myself to death, because I don't know if you remember, a lot of people probably won't, but there was a movie called Leaving Las Vegas. It starred Nicolas Cage and Elizabeth Shue. And Nicolas Cage was a true hardcore brown paper bag alcoholic, and Elizabeth Shue was a prostitute and she was trying to help him and everything, and he drank himself to death. And it was this, I romanticized the idea of, okay, I've made it to Las Vegas, I'm making a bunch of money, there's only one way to burn out. And I was right around that 27-year-old age. Wow. And all your heroes and icons, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, later on, Amy Winehouse. But so many of them died at that age. When you're in the music industry, it's in your mind subconsciously. That. You know what I mean? Am I going to make it past this? You know what I mean? Is it, and that's not for everybody, but I know that a lot of the younger rappers, think about that, and some of them have lost their lives earlier. But so 2007, I tried to drink myself to death, and I just drank and drank and drank and drank and drank. The problem is that I'm extremely high functioning. So, I could live, I could pay my bills, I could make money, I could survive, I could thrive, I could be I'm having my best years ever. So the more I drank, the more successful I was. They just went hand in hand, and the human body could take a lot. So somewhere around September, October of 2007, I got a DUI, ended up in jail, and I was really disappointed in myself for that. It was like it was a pivotal moment right there. And I got out and quit drinking like cold turkey for 3 years. I was like, nope, done, stop. Wow. But I was what we call in recovery, a dry drunk. So I became really bitter and angry. So I had this dark energy about me, but I was dry and sober, but I wasn't happy about it. I wasn't doing any healing work. I was just not drinking anymore. So I was still an alcoholic without the alcohol. Wow. I turned that into fitness and gambling. I was doing a lot of poker playing, and I was crushing it in my career at that time. Had 3 years where I didn't drink, went through a breakup, and then beginning 2010, opened up one of the biggest clubs on the Strip at the Aria Casino, and just picked it up, said, I'm back. And
So
then
interesting.
right around that time period, Tiesto asked me to move to Spain and be the tour manager for the Kaleidoscope World Tour, which is to this day still the largest DJ world tour in history. I think he did 156 countries. I was only on for a little over half of those.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was so ahead of its time. I mean, if you look back at the Kaleidoscope World Tour, like it was 25,000 to 50,000 people, 6 days a week. It was unbelievable.
Oh
Every
goodness.
country, everywhere. It was the biggest tour. It was like right up there with like Rolling Stones, U2, and because it was just us and a private plane, we could do more shows and do more countries. And I was drinking during that, but it didn't really affect much. But towards the end, I started to have anxiety, which I wasn't used to. I always had nerves of steel. And I started to have anxiety because my body wanted to stop drinking, and so
So how can you expand on that? How did you know that your body, because I feel like people do get these kind of warning signs in themselves, and how did you know, like, what was that?
Excellent question. It was our night off and we went to go see Laid Back Luke at Amnesia, and it was a Tuesday at Amnesia in Ibiza. And I remember we were meeting up with a billionaire and a bunch of models from the US, and I had a panic attack and no one knew it. And I just wanted to run away. And I had never felt like this before. And I was just like scared. And I was just like, the idea of one more night in this table and one more night in a club, like my nervous system was just shot. My nervous system was like, the panic, I believe, was a wake-up call, like, hey, what are you doing? Stop, slow down. You know what I mean? And so I started drinking less, but then I was like, I need to get back to Las Vegas, where I could have, I thought at that time, a balance of drinking and not drinking.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So going from that lifestyle, because you said you're jet setting around the world, you're drinking, you have this panic attack, and that's your signal to and I've had a panic attack, so I understand.
They're not fun.
They're not fun. And anyone who has never had one, it's just it takes over your whole body, and it shocks your system in the sense of like.
It's completely different from anxiety.
Yes. It's once you go there, it's like your brain can very easily, with depression, I feel like with everything, your brain, it's like you make those synapses and your brain can go there, but
you have like a PTSD of knowing that that's out there,
that it can happen.
Right. Which is like puts you in this fight or flight state of fear. Being in something that could be triggering to a panic attack is very crippling for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And so recognizing that in yourself, you go back to Vegas, you're trying to find this balance now. So what was next for you?
Well, I ended up working at the Hard Rock Hotel, throwing some concerts at the Joint with Tiesto. And then I wasn't really happy there, and I got another big job offer across the street, and I went there. And the next 2 years are very pivotal in my career, but also very interesting in my emotional life. I ended up leaving one big casino company for another, and was told by the attorneys that I was in the right, everything was going to be fine. The judge did not agree. I ended up losing my life savings. I ended up having a restraining order on me against Las Vegas. Like, I couldn't go into any casinos, nightclubs, restaurants, or pool clubs because all of them were competition to the company that I was leaving. I could only go to like dive bars and diners. It was pretty wild. I had one of the strictest restraining orders in the history of Clark County, because they were trying to prove in court that by me going to their competitor, I was damaging their company. So I moved to New York, where my new employer had an office, was working. We had a club and a pool club in Atlantic City, the HQ and HQ Beach, not the new version that they have now, but the original ones, in the Revel Casino. We were crushing it out there, but I'm in New York. I'm away from my friends, I'm away from my family, all of these things. I come back to Las Vegas. I lose the lawsuit. I lose all my money, all this, that I've been working for, all these and I didn't do anything wrong. I was told that I could go to another company and everything would be fine. And the judge didn't agree. Like it's a pretty painful process. I had still done all these incredible concerts and shows and raised all this money and done all these amazing things for a really long time leading up to that point. And then in the peak of all of this, on my birthday, September 29th, 2013, my mother passed away in a car accident. So that was a shock to my system. I was raised by my mother, and so she was my everything. My father's still in the picture. He always was, but they just divorced when I was little. And so that sent me spiraling. I didn't know what to do. And I'd left home at a young age. So my life was nightclubs and casinos and private planes. So I started drinking, and it was our first year of Hakkasan, and we did about 106 million in business. And I was crushing it at work, but drinking as much as possible to numb the pain of losing my mother. And Hakkasan put up with it for a short amount of time. And then right after our 1 year anniversary, they were like, we want you to go get some help. And this is 2014. And I went to a treatment center in it was like 2 or 3 days a week, a treatment center called Solutions in Las Vegas. And when I wanted to be, I was really cunning, really manipulative. I mean, at the highest level. So I was able to stop drinking and tell them everything they wanted to hear. So by the time I was done with this program, they'd written this beautiful letter of recommendation of how I was this outstanding member of society, and I was so incredible and helping so many people, and I wasn't an alcoholic, and they didn't see any problems. Like, I just fooled them. And so, when Hakkasan saw that letter, they knew that I wasn't doing the work. So they declined. I wasn't terminated, but they declined to reinstate my contract. It's all love. They all love me. They've all supported me. I still, we keep in touch, a lot of us. But I didn't know what to do then. So a dear friend of mine and I started a consulting company, and we started doing independent consulting in Las Vegas, in New Orleans, in Seattle, in Northern England. It sounds glamorous, and I used to tell it so it sounded glamorous. It was at a 150-year-old amusement park in this town called Blackpool, which is like the Atlantic City of the UK. It was not glamorous. We were really sad. And then right around that time period, I got a phone call to go be a part of a group that was doing a think tank for, a high-ranking politician in Ireland. I did that, and then I was still going back and forth. I just didn't know who I was or what's going on, and I was sober, but I was just like lost.
Yeah. So what mental state would you say you were in? Like, are you still, you had this pretty life-changing moment with your mom, and this, one of the things that I thought was interesting that you mentioned earlier was when you had initially quit drinking, you were just this bitter drunk. And I think that happens to a lot of people. Like, whenever they quit, like, I've quit drinking before for different things, but like you said, having those new practices or those new behaviors to kind of replace those things. I was the same way. I was just like the bitter person. I was like, oh, and I'm still kind of searching for something like that. So were you going through all these different things? Like, what was your mental state? Were you kind of were you the same person the whole time? Were you becoming more angry? What was going on? Or
yeah, those are great questions. I think I was lost. I went from being a big casino hospitality executive to flying around the world trying. I mean, like I was flying from project to project, coming in and as a consultant, but like, it's nothing is as big as the top of Las Vegas in the hospitality industry. So I felt a little lost. You know what I mean? You go from these huge comp accounts, you go from these huge teams, these huge budgets, to going to somebody who's in this 150-year-old amusement park, and they were like, hey, how can we turn it around? And you're like, you know what I mean? So I think there was a little bit, I don't want to say an identity crisis, but I was definitely right at that time period. I think an identity crisis came later, but at that time period, I was missing the glory, the glitz, the glamour. I didn't know what to do, what's next. And I was a little unsure of myself. You know, I definitely was recommended for a few projects that I didn't think I was worthy of, even though individuals were like, "Oh, you'll do great." Mm-hmm. I wasn't sure of myself, so my self-confidence had taken a hit. My family unit was shattered, right. You know, and now I'm sober, where I felt like I was Superman when I was drinking. Sober, I was like, you know, an unemployed Clark Kent, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because you talk about like your identity and an identity crisis. And I was thinking the whole time in my head, like a lot of people's, their identity is in their jobs, is in their roles. You know, they don't necessarily, like I've been through that as well, where I didn't know who I was. And I knew I was this badass medical sales rep. That's who I was. And I think a lot of people feel the same way, or their identity is in their job, or they place their whole self-worth in something like that. So I think it's very easy, especially too, when you're rewarded and you're doing these big things and you're flying around the world and you're jet setting, to very easily identify your self-worth with that. So to lose that, and now, like you said, you're feeling this way, it's like, whoa, what's...
And we're just scraping the surface of the conversation, because fast forward 5 years, mm-hmm. I really lost my identity and really came to a juxtaposition, but that was after my incident. You know, that was 2019. So that's where things really get a lot deeper, but we're still 5 years before that. And then we can get into where I'm at now, which is having a separation between when the music stops and myself. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I work on with my therapist, of being Josh Donaldson, not being Josh from Vegas, not being Josh with Tiesto, not being Donald God's manager, not being, you know what I mean, the alcoholic, not being that crazy guy, not being, you know, oh yeah, that's the when the music stops guy, like having an identity, which is something that a lot of us struggle with. And it's something that I'm getting to work on, you know what I mean? But we can regress back to that. 2014, I get a phone call from a gentleman, Paul Hemming, in San Francisco, and he had this club that he'd owned for, I think, 6 or 7 years at that time. And he was looking for some consultants to come in, and he was recommended to me, or I was recommended to him, rather. And we go back, and he invited my business partner and I, to San Francisco. This was in September 2014. We fly back from Europe, and we go up there, and we had our initial meeting, and we did a 90-day contract with him. And I was supposed to be there 4 days a month. But I was used to working 80 to 100 hours a week in Las Vegas. So I just overshot. I just stayed. And I just worked and grinded and crushed it. And he was like, will you stay on board? Initially we were in financial negotiations, and on paper, it didn't really make sense, but, I was looking for something new. And I thought that leaving Las Vegas, I would be leaving my alcoholism, leaving my pain of losing my mother, leaving all these frustrations, all this confusion, you know, and that's the biggest thing that we usually try to do in our lives, whether we're addicts or whether we're in a mental state or whatever, is go somewhere else. Where now I know in 2021 that we need to go inward, you know, and it takes a lot of courage to go inside and look inside and start doing real healing work. And I'm not talking about just therapy. You know, I'm talking about therapy. I'm talking about meditation. I'm talking about resentment lists of your entire life. I'm talking about deep soul work that usually only recovery provides the parameters for that. But there's other self-help people that are out there. Some of them are wishy-washy, but there's a lot of programs that are out there that help you pull up all the shit that's been inside of you. Because the things that make us sick, and I'm not just talking about cancer, the things that hurt us and bring us down are our resentments and our angers, and everything is energy. So I talk to people frequently now, and I'll bring this up casually, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, I don't have resentments against anybody." Well, you're lying to yourself, because everyone does. I'm sure that Buddha and the Dalai Lama did at some point. You know what I mean? I'm sure that was something that Jesus needed to deal with. But the reason why I say that is because they tell us in recovery, at a certain point, you need to look at every resentment you've ever had in your life, starting with your first memory. Go back to middle school, go back to high school. And you're like, well, no, I've moved on from that. Well, you might think that you have, but your subconscious mind, and you're energetically connected to that boy that rejected you on your freshman year, or that prom that you didn't get asked to go to, or that cheerleading squad that you didn't make. Every single one of those things is like a little energetic pebble or stone that is going in this invisible backpack that's strapped to you for life. Wow. And that backpack is full. And at this point in your life, if you're in your 30s or early 40s or whatever it is, this backpack is now about 120 pounds, because they say that there's around, roughly, if I had to just be completely, use an arbitrary number, at least a dozen resentments per year of your life. So if you're 30 years old, you should be able to come up with 300 resentments. You know what I mean? And you don't need them from birth, but that's just a rough estimate. Mm-hmm. And so only when you look at these things and you identify what was the role you played in them, can you be free of them.
Oh my goodness.
And so it is literally one of the hardest things that a human being can do. And not many are up for that challenge. And so when you do that work is when you become free of your resentments, when you become free of your hatred, free of your pain that you didn't know that you were carrying around into your marriages, into your relationships, into your employment, whatever it is moving forward. These things are with us, whether we know it or not. They're subconsciously in there. And you need to do the work. And they don't teach us this in school. Often they don't teach us this in church. You know what I mean? There's a lot of places where you just need to seek this, and you need to be on this path where you're ready to change your life, and you'll do anything to do it. And that's why I know these things, because I've got to the point where I was at one of the most drastic situations ever, and I had nothing left. No money, no people, no relationships, my family, you know what I mean? But everything was gone, and I was stripped, and I didn't know who I was. And it was finally, and only then, that I was ready to look in the mirror.
Wow. So those resentments that you're talking about as well, I want to sit on that for a second, because everything you're talking about too, as you're saying these, I'm like going through my head thinking about those triggers. And it's like a lot of those resentments, and like you said, those little rejections, that's something maybe, like you said, broken up with, or this and that, you think you're over them, and then you get into another relationship and you start pulling up those same patterns and those same behaviors. But it's just so interesting that, to get to that point to where you are today, and to have that know-how, this applies to everything, beyond suicide prevention as well. And everyone, I think that's such an impactful statement and concept to even think about. It's extremely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things, and again, I don't usually talk about this on the air, but one of the things that you're taught in recovery, which is one of the most powerful things that I've learned in my lifetime, is if you have a resentment, and I'm going to use my words, but the way that we're taught, any belief system or no belief system, you can do this. You know what I mean? So I don't want anyone to think that they need to subscribe to what I believe in order to do this. That's not the way that I'm taught. I'm taught that anyone from any walk of life or anything can do this. But so what we are taught is that if we have a resentment and you want to be free of it, and this is separate from what I was talking about, making this list, that's separate from that, something that we can do now. And this is again, this was a really hard pill for me to swallow. And it was something that was very difficult for my ego to do and move forward and practice, is that if you have a resentment against somebody, every day, whenever, morning or night, pray for that person the exact same thing you want for yourself. So if you want a significant other, if you want financial abundance, if you want security, if you want peace, if you want harmony, if you want love, the exact prayer you mirror for them that you want for yourself. And even if you don't mean it, you do this every day. Now, the instructions that we get is that you do this for 2 weeks. I had to do it for 8 months.
Wow.
And at a certain point, your subconscious mind and your heart will actually wish that for that person. And that day, you will be free of that resentment.
Wow. So is that something now, like as you're going through life, you know, you had, let's say 300 resentments and you're working through those. And so now something comes up for you, someone angers you, someone does something. Is that something you're actively, habitually like, okay, I'm going to think differently about this particular person? Yes and no.
I had 800 resentments. I was a little on the high end of the spectrum. But what we're supposed to do at the end of the day is a spot check. I don't always do it, but you're supposed to think back and be like, okay, who did I say something hurtful towards today? Who did I, where do I owe an apology tomorrow morning? And if you catch it, in theory, let's just put a time constraint on it. Let's say if you catch it within 24 hours, you can, before it turns into a wound, you heal it, you fix it, you make it right. You know what I mean? So something might slip out of my mouth that my old ego or shadow side, would normally, mean. And then now, because of all the tools and healing work I've done, I can be like, well, wait, hey, that was inappropriate. I didn't mean that. You know what I mean? Or retract back. Or if you get hurt or slighted by somebody, you need to let it go. I used to have a friend that used to always tell me, Bruce Lee said to be like water. And I'd be like, what the fuck does that mean? Be like water. Yeah. And I wasn't ready. And it drove me crazy. I didn't like that. I hated that phrase. And now it's everything to me, because water is shapeless. It can go into a bowl. It can go into a cup. It can go into a spoon. It can go into a swimming pool, and you just fill the environment that you're in. And so in being water, you aren't affected by everything around you, your surroundings. You adapt to them and you move forward, and you're able to learn how to do healing work on the fly and not to make yourself get worse, and also hopefully take this energy with you to everyone that you're holding space with, or that you're around, or the people that you love, or the people that you interact with. Now, does that mean if some guy cuts you off on whatever the main freeway is here in Austin, you don't want to be like, you know what I mean? You're going to, but then you catch that and be like, hey, I don't know what he's going through. You know what I mean? Maybe he's going to meet his pregnant wife at the hospital. Like, who knows? Maybe his kid's sick in the back. Like, I don't know what's going on. I need to focus on me. Maybe I can be a little bit more aware.
Right. Right. Wow. So, and I know you mentioned, I was, looking at y'all's feet and the 4 agreements as well. So like not making assumptions, that was probably a huge catalyst for me in like a very dark time of my life that I was going through. And that book completely changed my life. Mm-hmm. And like you said, just having those 4 agreements. I know that's something that you said in recovery, and even with When the Music Stops, right? That you guys have, so for people that aren't familiar, can you kind of just explain those teachings to people?
Yeah, absolutely. We should pull them up because I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's like be impeccable with your word.
Yeah, be impeccable with your word. Don't let what anyone says bother you.
Exactly. Like you can't control others as far as that, and then like not making assumptions.
Yeah, no matter.
Always doing your best.
And it's just a great stepping stone, and it's a great foundation it's a tool. It's an easy read. It's a simple book. My mom gave it to me. I didn't really pay much attention to it. And then in recovery, that's one of the things that it's so profound that they ask you to read. And they had it on the wall in the treatment center that I was at. And it's something that we can adapt to and think about and move on. And then there's more that goes from there. But these are just little tools that allow us to be able to have better lives, because, I used to seek out happiness. I didn't realize, if you watch a scary movie, you're only scared in that moment. You know what I mean? Not often does that fear resonate with you for a week.
Right.
Usually it's like, oh my goodness, that movie was really scary. You jump, you grab your partner, whatever it is, right? Happiness is the same way. It comes and goes. It's fleeting. It's just a moment. It's a reaction. You know, are you happy is just an ambiguous statement. It doesn't mean anything, you know, but what we can achieve is to try to have more good days and positive days than bad days. And that's what I try to do. You know, because I still have really bad days. I still have days where I don't want to get out of bed, or I have days where I have really dark thoughts, but I am trying my best to put together more positive days and more days where I'm touching someone else's life rather than thinking about myself. How can I help one other person rather than just think about what's, you know, to make myself more money or go on another trip or something like that? How can I, you know, what can I do today to impact one life? Is it Instagram? Is it text? Is it in person? Is it a phone call? Who can I check on? What can I do? And hopefully that'll come back to me, you know, and somebody will check on me, you know, but even if they don't, that's okay. I'm doing the best I can.
Right. One of the things I would definitely want to touch on, because I feel like this is something, you know, this is Suicide Prevention Month. And I actually had a friend recently, a really, really good friend, confide in me that that thought had crossed his mind. He was at a dark place. And I've been to that place as well, where I thought I was in a really rough time in my life. I was about to go my freshman year to college, and I had thrown this crazy party, and I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to lose my scholarship. I thought I was going to have all these things. And I remember in the moment thinking, like, what if I end my life? That's the answer.
Right.
And, you know, I'm curious. And like I said, with my friend confiding in me with what you're doing, is there some common traits or things that you see that these are the same kind of life situations that are happening to people, or some people out there that are watching this that maybe they're going through something? What would you say would be some things that you've seen kind of?
Well, so the CDC and the WHO will say that the deciding factors, or the top factors leading to suicide, are financial insecurity, stability of the home, you know, having a place to live, relationships, employment, things like that. Mm-hmm. I'm aware of those lists, but I think that so many of us could just have those thoughts because, you know, we got our feelings hurt, or we got embarrassed, or whatever it is. So I think that it's much deeper than that. You know, anything could lead to that cause, but it is Suicide Prevention Month, and we just ended Suicide Prevention Week. For me, I really truly believe that, you know, I want people to know that, and this is going to sound funny, that it's normal to have those thoughts. Now, do the majority of Americans have those thoughts? No, of course not. But for those of us that have them, my goal, if there is a goal, is to try and remove some of the shame and guilt that's attached to it. You know, maybe 6 weeks ago, I thought about hanging myself. Now, I'm not going to do that because of all this beautiful training and healing work that I've done. Those things don't mean that you're not going to have that thought. You know what I mean? Wow. But what it does is it allows me the moment to be like, okay, I'm not going to judge that thought. And this is where you're like the Bruce Lee be like water kind of comes into place. I'm not going to judge myself for having that thought, which is a very hard thing to do. That's easier said than done.
Right.
Instead of hanging myself, I'm going to take a shower, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to call a friend and just, you know, see how they're doing, or whatever it is. I'm going to change what's going on. I'm going to I read something recently. They were talking about a crisis box. I posted about it on our IG.
I thought it was really interesting.
And
that whole post was incredible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate that. I said maybe we should call it the joy box or the hope box. And I think it's something that we might start incorporating, but it's like a small box of things that you cherish and you love. Maybe a picture of your dog, maybe a picture of your mom or a family member. Maybe it's a ribbon or something to remind you, and just like something that you can look at that is going to access those endorphins in your heart to override that fear by touching with love and having this sentimental value and thinking things are going to get better. I think that's a great tool. But when I'm in a darker place, not anymore, but before, I would have that thought, I'm going to, I should hang myself. And then the next thought is, I wonder what kind of rope I need. Where can I get that rope? How much rope do I need? 12 feet, 18 feet, 22 feet? What should I hang it off of? A tree? How sturdy is it going to be? How much do I weigh? You know what I mean? You start calculating and planning, and then you start obsessing, and then your brain normalizes that thought to where one day when you're feeling overwhelmed, you execute your plan.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. So having those thoughts is not a bad thing. It's not shameful. It doesn't mean you need to be locked up. It doesn't need to necessarily even mean to be that you need. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be medicated. It's something that we have. They happen. You know what I mean? But we need support. We need community. The biggest thing that is lacking in 2021 is a sense of community. Obviously, during a pandemic, during this whole COVID situation, we've been isolated. We can't even see our families.
Right.
Social media pushes us away from community. Before we started, you told me you played basketball. How tight were you with your teammates?
Yeah, we were
thick as thieves.
Literally.
You know what I mean? And you had a community. Like, no matter what, those were your girls. And everybody else, your family, your boyfriends or whomever, partners or whomever it was in your life, didn't understand the blood and sweat that you and those girls shared every time you were on the court. You know what I mean? And that's what we need, is a sense of community. And it's not just the people around us, because not everyone around us thinks like we do. So for me, suicide prevention is that I'm a survivor, and somebody that has had suicidal thoughts knows me better than my family does, because they understand that thought and how scary it is and what it's like. So I can have that in common. If somebody wants to talk to me about anger, depression, alcoholism, suicidal thoughts, they're speaking my language, because I've been through all of those things. And it comes from a place of understanding and love rather than judgment or even diagnosis. You know what I mean? I'm not an educator. I don't have my PhD in psychology. I don't have my master's degree in psychology. I've been told I should get it. I want to focus on being a support system, and I want to lean on the educators. There's beautiful, incredible educators out there. I recently got the chance to work with Dr. Alfie, who's one of the leading African-American female doctors of psychology from Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area. She's amazing. You know what I mean? I could never live up to the work that she's done in her career. So it's my job to be a supporter and build a community and do all these things. And when I need the opinion and thoughts of an incredible psychologist, I reach out to that person. And that's not talking about my therapist. I've got a therapist as well, but my therapist has never been suicidal. She's amazing, but she's never thought about taking her life. So the people that come to When the Music Stops know me better than my therapist does.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's an interesting statement as well, because when you're building a community, and you mentioned it in another one of your interviews that you did, but you talk about like when you're in that state, that's literally when you're depressed, or, and I've, suffered from depression. That's like the last thing you want, is to be around people, to reach out to someone, to talk to someone, me personally, but knowing that this community exists and that people can essentially reach out. And I know you have like different ways for these people to communicate with you, but what would you say, like, how are you connecting with them versus, like you said, going to therapy or a different way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. For us, it started with Instagram. website, email, direct message, comments, and me being consistent in the reason why our Instagram has gotten to the point that it is, and is because up to this point for the last year and 8-9 months, I have, with the exception of 2 posts, I've written every post. Wow. And I'll tell you my secret sauce for anybody out there. I write the post to myself. I'm talking to me. So when I'm going through anxiety, I'll post about anxiety. When I'm battling depression, I post about depression. And then I write the captions to myself as if I need to hear that. Wow. And by doing that, energetically, people feel on a subconscious level, on an energetic level, the authenticity of every post. I've had a couple of comments, and I don't want to lean on this, but I've had a couple of comments recently of like, I've gotten more from your page than I did my therapist. Now, I've gotten more from my therapist than I did my page, but right. I appreciate that sentiment, and I understand that that's because I speak from the heart. I speak from a survivor standpoint. I speak from, the sense of community. I wanted to be an emotional support, and unfortunately, sometimes people reach out to the conventional methods of suicide prevention and don't feel as supported as they can. Now, there will be a time where I can't answer everything anymore. And we're working on those mechanisms and what that looks like. I've got a thought right now that I've been thinking about for the last 2 months. I'm in a bunch of different Telegram chats, one for UFOs and, one for alien sightings and like all kinds of fun stuff. And one of the things I've thought about is like, well, what if I started a When the Music Stops Telegram chat that it was just literally people that, were struggling with emotional thoughts and we could just support each other. You know what I mean? I don't know the liabilities in that. I think it's just a community support group. So it's something that we could do, because there's a lot of places and a lot of incredible organizations that point you away. Again, when you need a psychologist or a therapist or a clinician or something like that, we can get you those resources. But I want to know, what can we do with you? What can we do together? And then another way is by going to music festivals. For me, I know there's a couple of suicide prevention organizations out there that do that, but it's different because I was in the industry for 23 years. That's my whole life. You know what I mean? So there is a lot of, not a lot, but there is a high percentage. There's a percentage of overdoses, nervous breakdowns, suicide attempts that happen after festivals, in the days after them, days or weeks after that. And it's not something that's really talked about. I've been told by industry insiders, like this happened or this happened or this happened. And if you think about it, let's take a hypothetical situation. Imagine that you have this cool raver festival Instagram, your identity, Tommy the Unicorn, you're a shuffle dancer, you go, nothing. I love shuffle dancers. I'm just using this analogy. You have 50,000 followers, whatever it may be. And every time you go to a Saturday night big music festival, you put on your outfit and 100 kids watch you dance. But then on Monday, you're alone. No one in school knows who you are. Maybe you're struggling with your sexuality. Maybe you're struggling with your identity. Maybe you're in an abusive household. When the music stops, what's left? And you have this euphoric peak where, you get to hear Tiesto at 2:00 in the morning and you're dancing to him and there's 100 people around you and it's like, oh my God, and everything's wonderful. And then you're at home crying 24 hours later and no one's there and you're all alone. I want to create a community to where you're like, you still feel supported in the days after that festival. You know what I mean? And it's not just about like, oh my God, what are we going to wear at the next festival? It's like, hey, I'm not feeling too great. You know what I mean? Yeah. And how can we support each other and make each other feel better? Yeah. Through people that are understanding, because a lot of us still unfortunately feel judged by or a psychologist or a therapist or whatever it is, you know, sometimes.
Yeah. So you're almost getting emotional because I feel like you're speaking, like you're talking like essentially about me. I feel like as you're talking and you're saying these things, like I feel like that as well with concerts and music. And so like when the music stops really resonated with me, I texted you, I was like, hey, I had one of those oof moments when I was listening to you. And I know a lot of people can relate to this, is escapism.
Yes.
When you said that, I was like, oh, literally took the wind knocked out of me, because that is something that I know, especially now, you know, we're all cooped up and people are, you know, haven't had shows, haven't had the opportunity to connect and be with people. And that is my escape. Yeah. Essentially. And I always talk about that, you know, in shows and being able to go to music festivals and go to concerts. That's when, you know, it's a full sensory experience. And like you said, even that quick dopamine of I'm there and hearing music and coming home. And that's one of the reasons why I got a dog, because I was depressed and nobody knew that. Nobody knew that I was, even though you have, and I'm sure you see it all the time, you know, with influencers and people on Instagram, it is and I tell people that it's a highlight reel. You know, you take these pretty pictures, you do these things. And like you said, you might get all this attention going to festivals and meeting people. And then you come home and you're like, wow, what's, like you said, not to get emotional, but it is this highs and the lows and just trying to keep it all in balance.
There was a DJ who's one of the biggest in the world, he's a little older, Carl Cox. He infamously said a long time ago, DJing is the loneliest job in the world because you have 20,000 kids screaming your name. And then 2 hours later, you're in a hotel room with no room service. Everyone's asleep. You're in a different time zone. You can't get a hold of anyone and you don't even know what to do with yourself.
No. And Steve Aoki, I know, have you seen his documentary?
No.
He has?
I know Steve. But
yeah,
no,
yeah. So he has a whole documentary.
On Netflix.
Yeah. Steve's the one who actually got me to watch it. But he talks about that. And like you said, how they show him how he's just going jet setting around and doing all these different things. And one of the things that I thought you talked about in another one of your shows, the interviews that you did, was, you know, these celebrities coming out and these artists. And I know Balvin, another huge documentary that he did, that was really eye-opening for me. He's arguably the number one artist in the world. Yeah. And he's got coaches and therapists like there before he goes on stage, because he's so in his head. And just having, you know, for people that haven't seen it, I mean, he's there before his shows and he's got the Palo Santo, the candles, the meditation coach there coaching him through it. So it's like someone like that who struggles with anxiety and mental health to go that publicly and tell people you're not alone is so powerful. Yeah, no, it's tremendous. And a lot of people have talked to me about him. I had some friends that went to his show. My friends that were just here went to his show in Las Vegas last weekend. And actually, my friend who did production at Blended with me for When the Music Stops tent, Jerome Joyce, he did production for Balvin last weekend in Las Vegas. So, and multiple people are like, "Oh my God, you got to get connected with Balvin. You got to get connected with Balvin." When it's time, it'll happen. Right. A couple of his close friends are aware of us and follow us and things like that. But it's really important. Demi Lovato, obviously, she's got a couple of really big documentaries that she's done. She's came out with all kinds of struggles. You know, she's a huge advocate for many different things, and she's very transparent in her depression and her addiction and her disorders and the things that she's going through. Brandon Novak used to be a professional skateboarder. He was one of the original Bam Margera Jackass guys. He had one of the craziest lives ever. And he's one of the biggest people in recovery. He's got like 400,000 or 500,000 followers, and he's so amazing. And he tells his story. I mean, like, this guy was at the pinnacle of skateboard superstardom and literally burned it all to the ground and was depressed and suicidal and smoking crack and all this stuff. You know, so it takes people like this to change the narrative so that their followers and their fan base knows, wait a minute, it's not just me. It happens to all of us. And that's what it is. And that's when we're reducing the stigma on these things, the guilt, the shame, and the stigma. Because another thing that I should have mentioned already is that when I have a suicidal thought, I get to tell somebody.
That's the hardest thing to do, because you're opening yourself up and being vulnerable and allowing the space for somebody to potentially judge you. You know what I mean? It's a scary thing. I've had people say, you know, hey, how you doing today? And I've been like, actually, I'm thinking about killing myself. And they're like, crickets, just like that. And that's because, you know, that they're not sure. So I want to provide a space where it's okay, because holding on to that secret is what can lead to guilt and shame and make things feel worse. You know, getting it out and not being judged. Sometimes just being heard is all we need to do. We kind of got off the story, but at a certain point, not too long ago, I was advised that I should start speaking at treatment centers and detoxes in Florida. That's where I was living at the time. And I would go in there and run my mouth and tell my story. And now I was doing the healing work, but I still had some lessons to learn. I still do today, but I would go in and tell my story, and a lot of people couldn't relate. You know what I mean? Like, how are you going to relate to this crazy story that makes no sense? You know what I mean? And sometimes it was inspiring to people, but more often than not, they were like, why am I here listening to this guy brag about what he's done? You know what I mean? And in that awareness, I was able to learn how to listen. At 40 years old in my life, I'm aging myself now, I learned how to listen. And I would walk into a treatment center or a detox and say, hi, I'm Josh. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I'm from Seattle, Washington. I spent most of my life in Las Vegas. I'd like everyone in here to introduce themselves, tell me what their drug of choice is, where they're from, and why are they here. And I found that by listening, I could do more healing work with somebody than speaking. And often we go through our lives and we don't feel heard. So many of us don't feel heard by our significant others, by our spouses, by our kids, by our siblings, by our families, by our employers, by our peers. You know, so many kids in high school don't feel that they fit in the right clique, so they don't feel heard. Or they've got a girlfriend who's their best friend, but she's doesn't understand what she's going through. You know, especially if you're going through a eating disorder or something like that, you feel like there's no one else out there that understands, or suicidal thoughts. And you know, if you get to be that person, you know, and it's not about me or my journey, but sometimes just sitting there and listening with an open mind and an open heart is all that person needs. So oftentimes I've got to meet somebody right after a drug overdose, or right after a suicide attempt, or losing their job, or going through a divorce, or whatever it is, when they're at their low point. You know, you don't usually go to treatment when you're doing great and everything's amazing. Man, I need to go check in for 90 days. Right. You know, so you're in there at your low point, and I'll sit there and be quiet and listen. And I'm not thinking about what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm thinking about you. Mm-hmm. And just that energy right there sometimes is enough to help someone feel heard and give them what they need to just move forward in their life. You know, because a lot of us don't feel heard, like I mentioned, you know, but sometimes it just takes one time and that moment. And that for me is what real suicide prevention is. Wow. That's suicide prevention, is making someone feel heard, building a sense of community and having a connection. And I used to, for 25, 30 years, think that I knew everything. I absorbed information at a really high rate. So I had all kinds of retention of knowledge that I could spew back at you. I now know I don't know anything. And every day that I learn something new, I realize I know less than I did the day before. And it's a little sad, but it's also freeing. Right. And I say that because I try as hard as I can in every conversation to listen with my heart. I try. I'm not perfect, but obviously none of us are. And also think that, what can I learn from this person's experience? Whether they're 12 years old or whether they're 65, what if I'm just quiet for 2 seconds and I take something that I can learn that could change my life, rather than thinking about myself and missing whatever is being gifted to me right then. And once you start doing these things and practicing them, it'll change your life and those of the people around you. And in my opinion, that's suicide prevention.
Yeah, I think, and thank you. That was amazing. I feel like the exchange of energy too. One of the things that I've gotten into a better practice, one of my friends is having either, if I'm having a rough day, I'll call my friend, whoever it is, and be like, hey, I just need you to listen. But a lot of people don't do that. Or sometimes, hey, I'm checking it. Is it, I really need to get something off my chest. Cause sometimes that person is not, emotional dumping. And these people will come and just, lay all these things. And you're like, whoa. I can't handle that right now. And so I have a lot of open dialogues with my friends and, cause I love them. I'm like, I love you, but I'm not in the right state to hear this in this moment in time. So it's having that communication, but then on the reverse, them two being, and then asking, like, do you need advice, or do you want me to just hold space for you? And just having, like you said, just knowing if you're both having that exchange, then you can be there to serve each other in the way that you need each other.
This is a great opportunity to bring up something that I didn't know about until the last 2 years, which is toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is, let's say that you're telling me all these things that are going wrong, and rather than listening to you, I'm like, yeah, but what's going good in your life? Or I'm like, oh yeah, no, absolutely. That happens to me all the time. Or, yeah, but you're alive, aren't you? You're employed. Oh. You don't have COVID right now. That's toxic positivity. And that's something that even I have been guilty of not too long ago with one of my family members. One of my sisters came to visit me, and we were at dinner and we were talking, and she was telling me a bunch that was going on, and I started to have anxiety in the conversation. And I was like, can't you just be grateful for something? And I didn't realize for like an hour or two how hurtful and dismissive that was to everything that she was trying to say. And I know better, but it didn't matter. In that moment, I still made that mistake. Now I take it with me. Here we are, and I'm bringing it up because it's a lesson that I was able to learn. And I'm like, wow, I need to be aware of that, because so many people will do that to us. They will dismiss what we're saying, or they'll change the subject, or they'll say what they want to say. And that is more often than not. And that's what fuels feeling unheard in our lives, which leads to suicide, in my opinion.
No, I completely agree with you.
And feeling unheard is not on the list from the CDC and the WHO. Right up there with financial insecurity is not feeling unheard, but I think that it is.
Well, it's when people label your emotions and they tell you, like, I have body dysmorphic disorder. So people are like, what? You have, this blah, 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 blah body. And I'm like, but you're not hearing me. Right. I have what I see in my perspective is not your perspective. And that's clinical. That's what I've been diagnosed with, and I understand that. And that's my own personal battle. But then people come to you and they tell you, or like you said, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. You don't, why do you feel, or, oh, you're doing this for attention. That was a recent one that I got, like, oh, that's extremely hurtful. And what sucks is that even if that is our closest friend or whatever it is, it doesn't make it any less painful or hurtful that they would say something like that, but people don't know any better. And our communication is digressing. You know what I mean? We're down to scrolling, swiping, and liking, scrolling, swiping, and liking, scrolling, swiping, and liking, day after day after day after day. And now I'm not putting down social media because that's what I use to connect with people, but it wasn't like our problems were different 20 years ago. You know what I mean? And there isn't a lot of solutions. There's, other than our information being sold, there's not a lot of oversight, congressional or otherwise, ethical oversight on how social media affects the mental health of our youth. And I do know statistically that suicides from the age of 12 to 24 have gone up dramatically and drastically in the last 10 years. Wow. And so what can we, and rather than telling them, get off of social media, because that's not going to help. Right.
We need to have different conversations. We need to think different. We need to approach suicide prevention and mental health conversations different. Anytime I'm on the phone with somebody who's got their, double doctorate, master's, PhD, everything, studied everything Freudian, for the last 20 years and wants to just psychoanalyze me, I'm checked out. I changed the channel. I'm out. You know what I mean? Now I've been in some beautiful conversations with people like Dr. Alfie that are extremely understanding and listen to you and then bring in and incorporate some of the things that they've learned, but that's very rare. You know what I mean? So that's why, I think that we need to be more supportive and check on the people around us. One of the things you said earlier was almost along the lines of what to look for. There's very specific things, people selling their stuff and all this, but before it gets to that stage, I think that we can communicate better, be genuine, be heart-led, heartfelt, and try to think about those around us that we love and care about. It's a very simple thing. People will say, what can I do to help when the music stops? Yeah, check on your friends and family. Donations are great, but I want you to actually go out there and be a part of what suicide prevention means to me.
Wow. So where do you find, because there's so much, being vulnerable is super tough for anyone. And I feel like that is something, that's a gift that I feel like you've been given. To be that vulnerable about something that's so personal is incredible. So thank you for doing that. Where does that strength come from? Because I feel like that's some people that maybe can't even take that first step to even say like, hey, I've had this thought, that to them is too vulnerable. But like I said, here you are on this platform. And again, thank God that you're here to be able to have that voice for the people that aren't able to communicate like that. But what would you say, where do you derive that strength from, that courage?
For me personally, not associated with when the music stops, but for me personally, my higher power, God. Mm-hmm. I had lost my faith when I was in Las Vegas, worrying about what the bottom line is for the casino or the nightclub and what billionaire was flying in on his G5 that weekend from Hong Kong, or what was going on and what supermodels needed what. I had been far removed, and it was when I was putting my life together post my suicide attempt that it took months, and I realized that I needed something positive in my life. And so I got to lean on my faith. And for me, I needed to have that faith. And now I know that a lot of people I talk to, especially now in this day and age, are really upset with organized religion and let down with, whether it was, priests with children, or whether it's embezzlement, or pastors with 8 private jets, or all these different things.
Or even just the judgment, I feel like, is a huge thing. The judgment
is the judgment is the biggest.
I know that's what it is for me.
But yeah. And I love that you said that, because mental health issues and suicide thoughts are something that not a lot of churches want to talk about, or they'll just,
or it's a sin.
Unfortunately, they'll dismiss them and pray them away. Mm-hmm. But so for me, I got to refine my faith and use that as a stepping stone and a foundation to move forward. Again, when the music stops is kind of like a recovery. We accept everybody. You know what I mean? When the music stops, it's non-denominational, and we've got individuals that believe every different thing that are in our family and in our community. So whether you're, Buddhist or Hindu or atheist, we love you, and that's fine. Josh's personal story is separate from the when the music stops story. Let's say that maybe you don't have this hard rock foundation of faith. Where do you find that courage from? Is hopefully a community like When the Music Stops. You can follow us and watch us and see me open up and see me share other stories of them talking about their thoughts. And then, hopefully I get to create something like a messaging board or the Telegram group or something like that, where you're not necessarily telling everyone at your school what you're going through, but you get to jump onto the Telegram chat with, 1,000 other people that have similar thoughts and that are there to support you and can tell you like, hey, yeah, we understand, or there to listen, or, and peer support. Peer support is so important, so it's not the easiest thing, but starting this work, having these conversations now, hopefully down the road will make a difference.
I have a question for you. How do you, so seeing these, the DMs, the comments, the people that are reaching out, how do you for yourself not get emotionally? Because I feel like there's an empath in you, I'm sure, that connects to these people, but how do you safeguard your own recovery and your sanity essentially to keep this? Because I know, you see nurses and there's certain things that you just kind of become numb to sometimes, but I feel like with being in this particular, it's not an easy path to choose. And like I said, I commend you for that, because I don't know if I would have the mental fortitude to even scratch the surface on what you're doing. So how do you kind of either stay grounded or set those boundaries for yourself?
Well, I struggle with it. I fight it. I mentioned earlier how not too long ago I had the thoughts of hanging myself, and now you've asked a question that allows me to explain why. I saw on the news that a pastor in Alabama, who I posted about I didn't know him, but he was a youth pastor who was a suicide attempt survivor in 2016 and had written 3 books. I believe one of them, and don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that one of them was on the church and mental health. One of them was on the church and suicidal thoughts and suicidal attempts. And one of them was on the church and being queer. And he had a hit podcast, and he was a youth minister, and he was a coach, and he was a motivational speaker, and he was doing all these incredible things. And he took his life a few months ago, and it devastated me. Not because I knew him, because I know his pain and because I know his story. And I felt like if a pastor with hit books and hit podcasts and he's doing everything perfect, if he can lose to this fight and take his life, then I have no shot. I have no chance. Oh. And so for 3 days, I wanted to end it, because I was like, what's the point? Why am I here if I can't even survive? And I was able to talk it out and move on. I didn't plan it. I didn't figure out where I was going to get the rope. I talked to my therapist. I talked to some friends. They were a little taken aback. Most friends, most of us ask, hey, how are you doing? But not many people want to know the answer. You know what I mean? Which is something
really right. Yeah, I think that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, there's a deeper conversation right. we can have. But so my point, to your question was that I don't know. That impacted me. That brought me down. That was hard. I had a young lady earlier in this year. All I'm thinking about is suicide prevention and survivors or individuals that families that are have lost somebody. But I had a young lady who DM'd me from the ER after she slit her wrists, and I wasn't ready for that. She was like, I'm in the ER. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't know what to do. And she felt more of a connection and comfort to when the music stops, because I try my best to make it ambiguous so it could be anybody. At some point it will be, but today it's me. She felt a deeper connection with these authentic posts that I had been posting for X amount of time on the When the Music Stops page than her therapist, her doctors, the police, and her parents. Wow. Who don't understand what she was going through. But I wasn't ready for that in that moment. I didn't know what to do. Everything worked out. We moved forward. The young lady's alive. But I needed to learn how to not take these things with me. And I don't know if there's a perfect answer to that. There's all the cliche answers: meditation, prayer, nature, sound healing. I've been all over the world, never been to Sedona in my life until January. I've been twice this year. I'm planning a third trip. I just got back from Joshua Tree. I'm planning another trip. So going places where I can isolate and take a deep breath and unplug and think and let things go. Today I was invited to a big pool party here in Austin, and I stayed home. I stayed in my room and, got ready for this, but also was like, after holding space all weekend, I needed to be protective of my energy. And that's a tough lesson to learn, because I was a social extrovert who gave away my energy for 30 years. And now I don't have much to give. Well, I do, but I need to refill my cup.
Right. And recharge. Wow. Yeah. I feel like you said just knowing that boundary for yourself, because that's where people are doing all these things. And especially, I think that's what, if anything, quarantine kind of taught me throughout that point, was that I had to stop. I mean, I was just going, escapism, drugs, alcohol, everything, just to kind of make myself, but that was the life. Like you said, it was fast, and it just stopped so abruptly, and you had to sit there with yourself. And I think anytime that, like we were talked earlier about being the bitter, sober person, we had those moments, but at the end of the day, it's like, those are the most enlightening moments that I have for myself too, is in those times of silence. So I feel like, to your point, and for other people out there, just knowing like when it's good, when is it good? What are those behaviors and what are those traits too? Like you said, like nature, that's a healing thing for you. That's something that is good for you, and
all
incorporating that. Yeah. All of us.
There was a study that came out recently, and I want to throw this out there, is that, and this is wild, and I posted about it as well, but, if you spend a minimum of 2 hours in nature, your psychological well-being increases statistically. If you spend 1 hour and 50 minutes in nature, it does not. It has to be 120 minutes, but it doesn't need to be at the same time. Within 5 or 6 days, it could be 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes. As soon as you hit this 120-minute threshold, your psychological well-being improves. So spending a couple hours in nature a week is so impactful and important to what we're going through.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I don't know if you noticed, but when we were at the tent on Friday, I was there, everything was fine. And then yesterday when I met you, I was feeling a little anxious. And so I took off my shoes and socks, and I usually never, ever do that. I'm not that person. And grounded myself and left them off. And I lit some sage, lit some Palo Santo, and I just took a deep breath and just was ready to hold space with whoever needed it.
Wow. So what is the future now? And I know you've talked about doing different programs for children as well, similar to DARE, like we had when we were children, but what is the future? Like, what is your ideal world of, what is when the music stops accomplishing in a perfect world? Yeah.
Great question. Well, hopefully, funding gets better, because we're a small organization, and I have unbelievable people from all different places that are like, can't believe the level of impact that we've been able to have in a short amount of time with a small lack of funding. So I can't wait to get to the point where I'm a little bit better funded, and, because I will always be resilient and able to make the best out of the dollar. So when I have a little bit more than we do now, I'm going to be able to do a lot more work. But it's multiple things. So not the end, there's no end, but one of the most important things. So the first couple of years was always planned to be brand building, front facing, on the ground work. The next phase is the educational program, writing, co-authoring When the Music Stops educational program with some doctors of psychology. Amazing. And sitting down and putting my name on that. But it's not about me. I just think that I could, we could pull in kids, all kinds of different things, but we could write a program that is going to be able to, they're going to be able to retain the information, rather than in one ear out the other.
Right.
I'm really excited about the idea of throwing educational school concert assemblies, like taking a G-Eazy and a J Balvin and going to the, Los Angeles County School District, or or Wichita, Texas, or Wichita, Kansas, wherever, and saying we want to throw a concert for all the middle schools in this county. We need a stadium. We'll pay for everything. We're bringing G-Eazy, J Balvin, and we want to talk about suicide prevention for about 20 minutes. And I don't know a school district that would say no to that. Right. You know what I mean? And so when we get to that level of funding, then we'll just do what I know how to do, throw events and concerts, but do it with a purpose. Yeah. You know what I mean? And if you get J Balvin and G-Eazy to open up for 2 seconds while we tell them a little bit, and we don't put anyone down and don't tell anyone not to say no or not to do this or get off of that or delete this. You just tell them a little bit about what they need, and a little bit, I've been taught, a little bit goes a long way. Yeah. And then also, I want to continue throwing my own events, When the Music Stops events, where we can do fundraising, networking, and people can come to us, because the two things that are most important to me right now are music and mental health. And our community is based on people that love both of those things. And I think that there's a lot of people that love music that need a little bit of more love in the mental health department, and a lot of people say, well, I'm not suicidal. Nobody is suicidal until they are. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. Yeah. You know what I mean? So like, you might have a little bit of anxiety, but in 4 years that might turn into thinking about taking your own life, unless there's a little bit of steps that happen. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean medication and therapy, even though I do both and advocate for both. It means having a support system, being able to talk about things, working on your resentments, being able to manage things, having people you can talk to, feeling heard, feeling supported. But I think that we can do that in an environment where it's entertaining. In San Francisco 2 months ago, I threw a music and mental health conference where I was able to bring together music industry professionals, the producer and songwriter for Justin Timberlake, the producer or the sound engineer and songwriter for Carrie Hilson and Missy Elliott, doctors of psychology, minorities that were able to talk about how mental health affects communities of color. I wasn't in that conversation, but I was able to help facilitate it. And then in between every speaker was a poet, a musician, a DJ, a dancer. So you get a little bit of what you need and a little bit of what you want. So it's a hybrid of entertainment with an education. So it feels good. And it was 8 hours, and we were able to, people stayed to the very end. We were able to give away 50% of the tickets to the community, to people in recovery, social services, those in need. We did all kinds of contests and all these things. And so I want to do more of that. I want to do, more of these educational, entertaining environments where people can get what they need without having it feel so depressing. It shouldn't be. Right. It should be uplifting and joyful and life loving. You came into our tent. Our tent was purple and pink and colorful. And when we've got this beautiful team, and we had a DJ and a silent disco and massage chairs, and you're like, wait a minute. Yeah. And I had a therapist come in the day before and ask me, what does this have to do with suicide prevention? And I didn't want to put her in her place or anything like that. But unfortunately, she was coming from that old school of thought. Right. This is the new school of thought. You know what I mean? I want to be the alternative voice for suicide prevention and mental health, where we're a little bit more understanding of where you're at. We definitely can give you the resources if you're hurting or you're in need immediately. But at the same time, we can enjoy some music together.
That's amazing. Well, thank you. And how can people find When the Music Stops? What's the best way to kind of get in touch with you guys? Is it through the website, Instagram? Yeah, no, absolutely. So on Instagram, we're at When the Music Stops, all one word. On Facebook, I think it's at When the Music _stops, just because we had a problem with that. Our website is whenthemusicstops.org. My email is josh@whenthemusicstops.org. I'm very accessible right now. Our Venmo is at When the Music Stops. Our PayPal is josh@whenthemusicstops.org.
we need help. We want to grow this family, grow this community. Come talk to us, leave a comment, reach out to me, message me, share one of the things that you learn from this podcast with somebody that you care about, share information, check on people, and work on yourself. Do some of that inner work. It's never too late or too early to do something to save a life.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know it's late. I'm so grateful. This is going to help people. This is my own little mini therapy session as well, but just, yeah, thank you so much.
No, the pleasure is mine. I'm honored. I'm really happy that we got to meet in person, and I'm thankful that you asked me to come down here. I don't always say the right things, but these are my thoughts and opinion. And I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to be an alternative voice of support for some of us that didn't feel heard before, including myself.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So, thank you. We will see y'all next week.